in 2 university studies out of the University of Colorado, they show that 5 minutes of exercise 3 times a week, and of that 5 minutes, only 20 seconds is hard. The rest of it is actually barely moving. If you do that, you will improve your cardiovascular capacity by 12% in 6 weeks. So you're talking 15 minutes a week for 6 weeks, you get a 12% improvement in VO2 max, which is the gold standard for this. By the way, a 12% improvement in VO2 max is associated with 2 years of longer life. So this is a big change. Now compare that to what most of us think is necessary, which is, well, if I just go to spin class 5 days a week for 45 minutes, I know I'm going to get in shape. Well, 45 minutes of spin class 5 days a week gives you a 2% improvement. You got 6 times more results by doing 3 5-minute workouts. And so doing more of it doesn't improve the results. If I do 3 10-minute workouts, it actually works worse, not better.
Hey everyone, full disclosure, we don't like to demonize foods around here. However, I am intrigued by the notion of anti-nutrients and how some healthy foods might be working against our goals. And with that said, we have the original biohacker himself, Dave Asprey, back on the show to discuss his new book, Smarter, Not Harder, where we dive into the subject of anti-nutrients and how to get the biggest bangs for our buck in terms of nutrition and exercise. Dave, welcome back. So good to see you.
Jason, it's been a couple of years since we last chatted, at least on the show.
I know it's been a little over 2 years since we last chatted virtually on the show. I am so bummed that I didn't get to go to your conference, which Colleen got to go to and see you in real life, because your conference is always amazing. Colleen had a blast, and next time we are going to get ahead of it and get childcare, and we will both go. But it's moving to Orlando too, which is in Florida. I can drive there
in June in Orlando, biohackingconference.com. And yeah, it'll be a quick drive for you. We're expecting more than 4,000 people for this one. And it's we outsold the Beverly Hilton where we held it in California. We had more people who wanted to come than could get in. And the last minute, I had all these incredible celebrities and billionaires and all trying to get in, texting me personally. And finally, one of them, I'm like, if you're the Queen of England reincarnated or something, I still don't have a ticket for you. Like, I don't know what to do here. And so it was funny. But yeah, I didn't want that to happen again. So we can scale as big as we need to, because the demand for biohacking is bigger than ever.
That's amazing. And we won't go to the Royals because that's just another controversial subject we just won't touch here on the show. But sign of the times, another great conference moving out of California and going to Florida or Texas, where you moved.
Yep. I just moved to Austin a couple months ago. So I'm enjoying sunshine and community here that I wasn't getting with all of my sheep on the regenerative farm in Canada.
Sheep, is that a metaphor for what's going on in
No, that's actually because I'm a regenerative farmer. We have sheep. We also have 25 pigs, which is more of a metaphor for politicians, if we're going to go there.
So at any rate, great to see you. Congrats on the move to Austin. Really excited to go to your conference in June in Orlando. So I love the new book, Smarter, Not Harder. Personally, it is a concept, a notion, if you will, that is very attractive to me. But I'm curious from your perspective, what's the why behind the book?
I don't like to write books just to write books. It takes a couple thousand hours to write a good book. And so I write a book when I have new thinking that I need to crystallize for myself and to make it consumable and teachable for people. And it just has to be worth their time if it's going to be worth my time to form it this well. And what I realized is that I've addressed food at length in the Bulletproof diet, and people have lost a couple million pounds. And I've addressed cognitive function in a award-winning way with my brain book. And what I haven't touched on enough is exercise. Turns out most people say, I want to be healthy, so I go to the gym. But the book is called Smarter, Not Harder, because no one goes to the gym. Like maybe 1 in 100 people go as much as they think they should. There's $400 million worth of ghost gym memberships where people never go and they pay every year just because they feel better about it. So I realized it's not because we're lazy and stupid. Actually, it is because we're lazy, but it's not because we're stupid. And there's reasons for this. So I go through the psychology of it, and also the fact that we're smart and we say it doesn't work very well. So you spend a lot of time And yeah, you feel a little bit better eventually, maybe. But for me, I spent 702 hours working out, 90 minutes a day, 6 days a week when I weighed 300 pounds. Didn't lose any weight after all that time, even though I could max out all but two of the machines at the gym. So this book was kind of my revenge to say, well, here's what actually works. And it turns out in the last 20 years, we've turned the idea of exercise on its head, but people are still picking up rocks and running away from tigers, the two kinds of exercise. There was that. And then there's these other three domains of health and fitness that everyone wants. And I learned this because Upgrade Labs, my biohacking facility, that was the first biohacking facility on the planet underneath Arnold Schwarzenegger's office, I've had a chance to interact with thousands of people. And there's 5 things we care about. It's not just getting ripped. And so helping people understand, what do I care about? And then what is the technology and the techniques and the new knowledge that gets me there fastest? And how do I motivate myself in a new way? That was worth writing a book about, because people can save 8 hours a week that they probably weren't really going to spend anyway. And they can get the same results. And the differences are pretty phenomenal.
I just love it, the premise, because we are getting fatter, we are getting sicker, and yet our industry is ballooning. It's exciting, to some degree. There's so many people creating great products, putting great information out there, yet we're not really getting any healthier. And so I think we need to assess what we're really doing here. And even though I really do enjoy, to your point, I think the diet, what you talk about in diet in the book, is fascinating. And I want to touch on that. Let's start with exercise. Since
I want people to understand this is not a diet book. I've written a very extensive diet book that's stood the test of time. There's just a few tweaks in it that make every other biohack and technique work better. And I realized if I teach someone how to get cardio exercise in 5 minutes 3 times a week, that is 6 times better than going for 45 minutes 5 times a week. It doesn't work if you're missing a few basic things that even in the world of biohacking, they're just not sexy. So guys, you got to fix these couple things, because then your meditation will work better if you're on the part of the book that's about the brain and the mind and stress management, and putting on muscle will work better. So these are the most foundational, highest return on investment things you can do. And they aren't sexy, but they're so foundational. Who cares if you put a beautiful roof on your house if your foundation is made out of kale? It's just not going to work.
So what, before we go to fitness, let's start with diet then. What are some of those foundational things?
There are 2 things that almost everyone is missing today. And you can spend a bunch of money on a brain formula. You guys have a good brain formula that you've come up with. And what's missing is minerals. Minerals allow the body to do all of the biological processes that are hard to do. They're what make enzymes and cofactors and proteins, and yes, your bones, but minerals are part of creating energy in your cells. We've created a world where our soil is depleted of minerals, and glyphosate actually sticks to minerals in the soil so that plants don't get them, you don't get them. And then we eat a bunch of these superfoods, these plant-based foods that are full of plant chemicals that suck minerals out of your body. So you don't get as many as you used to. And you're eating things that suck them out. You don't have minerals. You can't make a spark in your cells, the spark that burns fat, the spark that increases consciousness. So I talk about macro minerals, things like sodium and potassium and magnesium and a little bit of calcium maybe in certain forms. And then these idea of trace minerals and ultra trace minerals, it's to the point that my new coffee brand, which is called Danger Coffee, because who knows what you might do when you feel that good, that kind of danger, not the menacing kind, but it's full of trace minerals so that we get it when we drink our coffee because it's missing from our soil. I want everyone to have enough minerals that then they can fully express who they are. And after you get minerals in your diet, you're still not going to get what you need, because the thing that makes the minerals enter the cells and stay where they belong is what I call in the book vitamin DAKE, D-A-K-E. And if you're missing vitamin D, everyone knows vitamin D, calcium. A lot of people don't know you need vitamin K to keep the calcium from going into your scar tissue or your arteries. But vitamin A is important for getting zinc into cells. And vitamin E supports a bunch of other things like iodine. So if you just took your fat solubles and you took your trace minerals, ideally in Danger Coffee, but there's other ways to get them, trace mineral supplements are available. And maybe some magnesium and other big minerals. Those are not sexy biohacking nootropics, testosterone optimizers. All funny enough, though, they help your brain, they help your testosterone. They just make everything work better. So the idea is, I'm going to assume, and we'll talk about laziness in a little bit, that everyone listening here actually wants results without doing work. And it's kind of shameful to admit it, but you wanted a free lunch. You didn't, you didn't want to have to pay for lunch, but you're willing to. So how do we make everything work better? It turns out these are the lowest hanging fruit.
This concept of, we're doing something we think is healthy, but maybe isn't, is one I think many people fall victim to in our space. And I thought the part of the book where you go into detail on anti-nutrient foods specifically, these foods are quote unquote healthy, but in your view, they are not. Can you spend a little bit time on anti-nutrient foods? I think it's fascinating.
It's worth just noting, I was a devout vegan and a devout raw vegan, and I have juiced and sprouted and blended and fermented and all the things you do. And the reason you do it is because, well, plants have minerals. And that's actually great, except if something's in a food, but when you eat it, you can't use it, it doesn't matter if it's in there. For instance, spinach. Everyone's, well, Popeye had spinach. Spinach has iron. Iron is good for you. But the fine print says that the iron in spinach is only 1.7% absorbable. So who cares if it's in your food if your body can't get it out of the food? And worse yet, some of the new superfoods that are marketed that way because they're cheap, because they're high margin for big food companies, these are the foods that are highest in the plant compounds that actually pull minerals out of your bones and out of your cells. So what happened to me when I was a raw vegan, and one of the reasons I eventually figured out it wasn't working for me, is I felt amazing at first. And there's a reason for that. Your thyroid upregulates at first because you have a lack of certain fats. But then over time, I started getting autoimmune things. I got cold all the time, which happens when the thyroid gets exhausted and depleted of minerals, including iodine, even though I was eating seaweed. And it gets worse from there because these things suck minerals out to the point that I started cracking teeth because they were demineralizing. I cracked 2 teeth and had to do like an emergency dentist appointment. And after the second one, I'm like, wait, what's going on here? I thought I was getting healthier on this, but I had lost a lot of muscle mass, even though I did lose weight on it. And I just realized I was doing it wrong. And I ended up having to come up with a diet that restored my cell integrity. But what I had done as a raw vegan, eating masses of raw spinach and raw kale and raw everything else, and then even cooked things like that, is that it soaked my body's tissues in something called oxalic acid. And this is something that is present in many foods, but there's quite a lot. And it's a major cause of kidney stones and gout, as well as a condition called vulvodynia, where women get these razor sharp calcium oxalate crystals in their vulva to the point they can't even wear underwear. Like it's a thing. And the incidence of oxalate based kidney stones in people who are eating these healthy foods, it's much higher. And I actually talked about this, I think 8 years ago on the Joe Rogan show. I'm like, Joe, you're telling people to drink these kale smoothies. Raw kale and raw spinach and these greens, they're harmful because of this. But if you cook them and drain the water, you can process them in order to make them less harmful that way. And I think 7 years later, when he had Mike Tyson on and Mike was talking about killer kale and how he went off kale and his body stopped hurting, same thing happened to me. Kale and spinach actually cause musculoskeletal pain in a lot of people and joint pain. And you could say, but I love it. I love donuts too. It doesn't mean I eat them. And you actually don't love kale as much as you love donuts. Let's just face it. So I realized this conversation around binding minerals in your food is kind of missing. But the one that's not in the global conversation, but will be after Smarter Not Harder comes out, is something called phytic acid. Is that something you were even familiar with? Was that in your universe? I mean, you're a pretty knowledgeable guy.
Yes, not like so oxalates on a personal level are very in my universe because about 20 years ago, I had a kidney stone. God, my diet back then was terrible. I was having so much Splenda every day. And alcohol, and you name it. I was a little bit of a mess. I looked good, but I was a mess. It was one of the most painful. It felt like someone was stabbing me in the stomach. It was extraordinarily painful. And my mother recently had her left kidney removed. Her right kidney is fine. We're very happy about that. And so, at any rate, oxalates, specifically spinach and all oxalate containing foods, are very top of mind for me.
Now, I want to be super clear that two of the foods that I recommend contain oxalates. Dark chocolate is provably good for your vascular system, and some has heavy metals, some doesn't. But there is a certain amount of oxalate depending on how it's fermented. And some chocolate has a lot more than others. And you can actually feel the difference. If you eat chocolate and the back of your bottom teeth feel kind of furry, like they do when you eat raw spinach, that was a high oxalate chocolate. But good quality chocolate, there's some. We can all handle a certain amount of oxalate, but eating huge amounts, especially from these big leafy green vegetables, it's just not good for you. Eat the colored lettuces that have all the good stuff without the bad stuff. So the idea in Smarter Not Harder is let's lower but not eliminate oxalates. And if you're like I used to be, where I'm going to eat a ton of almonds because almond flour is good for you. That's especially raw almonds, a massive source. You could sprout them. That helps. And then you eat buckwheat, which is also exceptionally high in oxalates. And coffee has small amounts of oxalates in it even. So it's not like you have to go to zero. You just want to not punch yourself in the kidney over and over by intentionally consuming foods. Well, leafy greens, they have whatever polyphenols in them. So there's a reason to do it, but you have to look at the sum of the negative and the positive. And the strategy that works really well is let's stop doing the stuff that's harming us by taking our minerals or by adding toxins like Splenda or whatever. And then let's do more of what makes us strong. So many of us just do what makes us strong and ignore all the bad stuff we do. And that's not functional thinking. And it means you get very few results from your biohacking. The way I did when I went to the gym for an hour and a half a day, I didn't get the results. And part of it was nutritional. Part of it was I wasn't doing the right things in the gym and I was wasting a lot of time. So phytic acid is less famous than oxalates. And phytic acid is such a problem that farmers, and I can say this reliably because I've been for like the last 8 years on Vancouver Island, a small regenerative agriculture farmer with cows and sheep and pigs and chickens and all the above. Farmers know that if you use things like corn and soy and other feed, which I didn't use, but if you use those with your animals, you have to measure how much phytic acid is in it, because if you give animals feed with too much naturally occurring plant-based phytic acid, the animals break their bones, they become infertile, they develop lesions, they develop kidney stones, they get sick. So it's funny because birds and cows have a digestive system that actually makes the enzyme that breaks phytic acid down. Humans don't make it almost ever. And if you eat massive amounts of it, you'll make tiny bits of the enzyme to disable it, but not enough. So what farmers do is they actually add an enzyme into food so they can feed cheaper food to animals who are built to handle this. We're not. So when we eat these animal foods, including a lot of grains, we build up a deficiency in minerals because every time you eat it, it steals from you. Our ancestors knew about this, which is why if you were to go to an area where they ate grain for thousands of years, there was always a very long preparation process. There was usually fermentation. You don't use baking powder because that would actually not disable the phytic acid. But if you made sourdough and you let it bubble for a week, the bacteria would eat the phytic acid and create phytase and actually reduce it. Rye bread has a lot less of this toxin than wheat bread, for instance. So we knew this, and we had all these weird food preparation techniques that big food doesn't follow anymore to reduce it. If you were to cook some white rice, you don't get very much phytase. But if you were to take brown rice and instead of cooking it, you made puffed brown rice, the phytic acid is entirely intact, and you eat that and you will become mineral deficient even if you're eating the rainbow of fruits and all that. So it's very important you do this, because if you're deficient in minerals, it doesn't matter how hard you try, your body can't make the electricity it's supposed to.
So in a sense, what you're saying is you could be doing all the right things in terms of your diet, but if you're consuming too much phytic acid, you're depleting yourself. All that good work has gone to waste.
It has gone to waste. In fact, you wasted money on that food because you couldn't use it.
I think this is so interesting, and I agree. It's not on most people's radar, but will be after this show and after your book hits the bestseller list again, as I'm sure it will. Uh, it's everywhere in so many foods we perceive to be healthy. What are some of the greatest offenders in your opinion?
From a phytic acid perspective, it's grains, especially unfermented grains, but even fermented grains have a problem. So if you're going to eat wheat, eat the sourdough that's made with a traditional preparation. It's going to have a much lower mineral stealing effect than the bread that was just baked quickly. In fact, a very big difference. Whole wheat is worse than white bread. It's one of the reasons we make white flour is it's removing toxins. But if you're eating whole wheat bread that isn't fermented for a substantial period of time, you're going to be getting a problem. Rice cakes, terrible problem. Corn flakes, all of the cereals, huge amounts of this. And in fact, cornflakes were engineered to lower testosterone by Dr. Kellogg, who believed that sexual desire was the root of all evil in society. So he and Graham, the guy who made graham crackers, also high in phytic acid. Well, they created these low fat, high phytic acid, high carbohydrate foods that would lower testosterone. They do it by stealing zinc in addition to many other mechanisms. So you don't have to do that to yourself in the name of health. It's just not how the body works.
And what about nuts and seeds, specifically all the butters and milks? It
You have a
seems to me.
point there. Raw sunflower butter, high in this. And almonds, even walnuts have some, depending. And walnuts range a very large range from not very much to a lot. Macadamias are actually pretty good. But most of the nuts and most of the seeds, look, a handful or a tablespoonful, generally the studies support eating that as being good for you. But it's when you say, well, I needed a snack, so I just ate, a pound of of almond flour pancakes. It's not going to work. And heat doesn't break phytic acid down in a meaningful way, unfortunately.
I think so many of us consume a lot of nut butter. I think many of us consume a lot of nut milk. Is macadamia the better choice, or are none of them good? I'm just curious what your point of view is.
Actually, coconut and macadamia are your best bets. But one of the biggest offenders out there that's just not a health food, it's peasant food, and it's oatmeal. The name for oatmeal is gruel. And this is what you would feed the servants who were working your estate because it was the cheapest possible human food. Even in Rome, the gladiators were called barley men because the gladiators did not get to choose what they ate because they didn't have any freedom at all. So they would just feed them barley, fermented barley. And it's not a great long-term thing. It's enough energy in these plants to keep you from starving, which is great, but it is not enough to keep your minerals intact, to give you full nutrient sufficiency. The real power foods out there were the most mineral rich. And this was always eating liver, heart, and other organs, as well as shellfish. The other big source of minerals throughout all of human history was salt. This is why the original trading routes on the planet were for rock salt, because rock salt contains all the trace minerals, the same kind of minerals I put in Danger Coffee without all the sodium. And you need all these trace minerals. So we used to get a lot of these because all of our fish and all of our meat was preserved in salt. So we would eat all of the trace minerals that came in that food because of how it was preserved. Now we have refrigerators. So we eat less rock salt, which means we get less minerals. So we've just created a situation where we don't have the raw building blocks to make all of the enzymes that let us have our full power.
And look, I think this is so interesting in that I'll use my N of one case study of me. I'm pretty good in terms of what I eat. And I do extensive lab work twice a year with Dr. Frank Lipman, 28 vials of blood, and everything's largely pretty good.
Only 28 vials?
Only 28. And look, my view on blood work is, strive for excellence, but it, nothing's ever going to be perfect. And maybe the moment it's perfect, you get hit by a bus, and it doesn't matter. And I was discussing this with our mutual friend Molly Malouf, and our one mystery, and every once in a while I love a good medical mystery, is my iron levels are somewhat normal, but my ferritin really dropped. And
to below healthy, right? Because you don't want high ferritin by a long
We
shot.
don't want high ferritin, but it's low. It's not like dangerously low, but it's pretty low, and it's been going low for about 2 years. And so he was very concerned because that could mean you're bleeding internally. So I did the full colonoscopy and endoscopy, totally clean. And so I'm thinking, anti-nutrients, phytic acid. You know what? I think this could be potentially playing a role. I'm a lot more active, and I am having a ton of phytic acid in terms of, you mentioned the alternative flours, the almond flours, the nut butters, the nut milks. And I'm like, I'm kind of having this a lot. And maybe this is playing a role. I'm starting today. I'm moving to water and trying to eliminate my sunflower butter consumption. And
I stopped eating almost all nut butters. It's a rare treat, and I tend to focus on macadamia. I will have some cashews because they have the right fat ratio. Those are two that I like. But if I was to eat masses of cashews, I would still get too much phytic acid. And some people tolerate cashews well, some people don't, depending on their genetic lectin sensitivity, which is another anti-nutrient, but not one that steals minerals. It just causes inflammation from an immune perspective. So yeah, you're basically eating a whole bunch of foods every day that suck minerals out of your body and stop minerals from absorbing through your gut. But that's probably only part of your story. Because one of the really important minerals that we're lacking is something that gets pulled out, and it's copper. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic is everyone and their mother started adding zinc to every supplement. So if you open your medicine cabinet, or for me, my vitamin cabinet, and I look at all the labels, there's zinc in this, there's zinc in that. And some people are getting a ton of zinc because, after all, there are tons of studies that show getting adequate zinc reduces your chances of getting any kind of infection, even a really famous one. So, see how I did that there without saying anything that can't be filtered? But what what happens is zinc will outpace copper. They need to be taken in a ratio with each other. So what you've likely done is increased your zinc consumption, which suppressed your copper absorption. Meanwhile, what little copper you were eating was stolen by your nut butters. So now you are highly copper deficient.
my nut butters are thieves. They're
Exactly. Those bad nut butters. And the thing is, nut butters aren't bad. They tend to be high in omega-6 fats, and they do have some nutrients and some polyphenols, but they're like, have a peanut butter. Actually, peanut butter is really bad for you. Have an almond butter sandwich once, twice a week. But if you do what I used to do before I understood oxalates when I was a raw vegan, it's like, yeah, of course I make my chocolate almond butter, slab, and I'll just eat that because it's delicious.
Who doesn't? You stick the big spoon in. It's hard to just have a tablespoon.
It is very hard, especially you add some honey to it. It's really good. So you eat half the jar. I mean, Nutella exists for a reason, right? So this is a problem. And since it's stealing copper, which is actually more missing from our diet even than zinc, it's an issue. Do you know where you get copper from food?
Please tell us.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, if that's a part of your nutritional philosophy. Like, are there foods you eat on purpose for it, or do you take a supplement, or is it just kind of not part of the picture?
I'm assuming I'm getting it from my red meat consumption.
You don't get very much copper from red meat. There's a small amount in there.
Then what are the best sources of copper in terms of diet? Because it definitely wasn't top of mind for me.
Liver is a good source, right? But if you have liver and you eat it with phytic acid, you won't be able to absorb it. And if you eat it even with oysters are very high in zinc, and then you won't absorb your copper because there's only so much space for things to go in. So unless you're doing what I do, is I take a variety of powdered organs in capsules. I have for whatever 12 or 15 years. It's becoming more popular these days because of a few influencers are really focusing on organ meats. But that is the traditional source. Also, dark chocolate has a meaningful amount of copper, but it also contains some oxalic acid. And depending on how it's fermented and roasted, it can have phytic acid. Which might steal some of the copper. But right now, for most people, if you're eating, 100 grams, in other words, a nice sized dark chocolate, 70, 80% bar, you're probably getting some good copper that way. In other words, it's rare in our diet unless we eat ancestral foods. So you're copper deficient. Remember Coppertone, the sunscreen? I mean, you can still buy it, right? But Coppertone used to be called that because it had copper in it. And when you rub copper on your skin, then your skin can make really healthy collagen. And so it actually improved your skin consistency. And then some people had too much copper, which is a problem for some people. Copper becomes toxic at high levels. So they pulled copper out of Coppertone and just kept the name, but it's not a source of copper for us anymore. That used to be a major source of copper that made people healthy.
Fascinating. Well, I definitely think I am not alone here.
Here's the frosting on the cake. Of course, it's an almond cake. It's in order to absorb iron, you have to have enough copper. So your ferritin is going down because you're lacking copper, so you can't make use of the iron. And iron is chelated by nut butters, which steal the iron anyway. So a lot of women, especially, get anemia, and then they keep getting iron infusions, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because of copper. So what I teach you in Smarter Not Harder, and this is only like a couple chapters, there's one on fat solubles and one on minerals and trace minerals. Do these because everything else just works better. And stop eating stuff that steals your minerals, or at least minimize it. Take your digestive enzymes and treat the foods right by eating, the fermented rye toast instead of the whole wheat toast that you think is healthy but is less healthy. And maybe that oatmeal, especially overnight cold oatmeal, that's the dumbest thing you could ever eat.
So another one I think is, I think more people are educated on, but I still think it's worthwhile to spend a little bit of time on omega sixes. Also everywhere, problematic.
I believe this is a preeminent cause of diabetes, along with obesogens, these toxins in our environment that are clogging up our energy producing cells. Omega 6 oils are actually necessary for you to live. They're just necessary at trace amounts. If you eat grass fed beef, which has a very good fatty acid profile, it's about 1.6% omega 6 fats. So you need them. But when you start eating huge amounts of them, like you get from all plant fats except for coconut oil and palm oil and macadamia oil, you get lots of omega 6s and almost everything else. Even olive oil has a meaningful amount, although there's a lot of omega 3 in it as well. So you do this, and then it enters your cell membranes, and the body tries to use it as a building block. What polyunsaturated means is that there's many unsaturated parts of the molecule. Think of like a little spiky ball, and each spike on the ball is a place where oxidation can happen. So once they're in the cells in excess, the cells start making free radicals from oxidation. So you end up making cells that are constantly inflamed, and they're worse at making energy because it affects the membrane of the cells where energy is made. So when people clear omega 6 fats out of their diet and replace them with saturated fats and monounsaturated fats, they start feeling better. Their metabolism increases. And it takes about 2 years in order to replace half the fats in your cells in your body. And this is why I noticed when people started doing butter and coffee, the original Bulletproof coffee recipe, that it for about 2 years, my experience was the same. If I don't have more grass-fed butter, I'm going to die. Like, it is like the holy butter. Like, you have to have it. And after 2 years, when half of your fats have been repaired by eating enough saturated fat, you're like, you know what? I love butter. I'm going to have some in my coffee. I'm going to have it on my broccoli or whatever. But it's not, I don't have the deep need and that strong desire because I'd repaired my cells enough. But most of the time when I'm working with former vegans like I was, and I get them to add ghee, grass-fed, humanely raised, clarified butter, just the fat from butter, to their vegetables, it's like this wave of relaxation comes over them. It was like, oh, I got what I needed. I'm nourishing my cell membranes. And it's like this, oh, like, thank God I get to have this. And they have to get over the idea that, well, you need animal poop to make soil to make the dumb kale you still want to eat. So by supporting regenerative agriculture, you're actually supporting the soil and supporting life on the planet. And by eating only plants that usually were cut down with a tractor, you're actually killing more animals than if you had just eaten a cow, as long as the cow was grass fed. So you're supporting death of lots of animals. You're not supporting cruelty if it's an ethically raised cow that made the butter. More like you would find in India, where you don't kill the cows. You use their butter as something that's important for Ayurvedic health. So I think we can bring that mindset even to the most, even to the angriest vegans. Just that, hey, you'll kill less animals if you include ghee in your diet, and you'll support soil and you'll support the existence of the animals. So I think it's ethically consistent, to the point I even convinced 2/3 of David Wolf's conference to start putting ghee on their vegetables because you absorb them better. So why? Because grass-fed ghee has vitamin K2, so you can make better use of the minerals in your veggies. Like, it works that way. This is how Mother Nature evolved us.
Well, I do think we're at a point in time where most people have come to the conclusion that the junk fake meat, one, is not healthy. I think most people are there, and two, isn't going to save the planet. Eliminating animals is not the answer.
I don't know. I think we should all eat industrial food out of tubes. I mean, clearly that's going to make the highest consciousness society with the least suffering. I mean, I don't know what planet you're from, Jason. Jeez, bugs. Bugs are the future. By the way, deaths per calorie on bugs, not very good. Death per calorie on eating a cow, you'll kill half a cow a year if you get a pound of steak. And that's in the entire life cycle of producing the cow, as long as the cow ate grass. So I feel at peace. Also, I've raised my own cows, but I feel at peace with the decision to do that. I just don't eat industrial meat because that's bad for the planet, bad for animals, bad for humans.
Hmm. And so, coming back to the anti nutrients to close the loop here. So, phytic acid, oxalates, the omega sixes. So many people in our space, they do try to avoid grains and gluten, and but they need to bake, and dessert happens, and you go to those alternative flours, the baking flours. There's almond flour, everything. This is where I think so many of us are going wrong. Is there a better answer? Is it coconut flour? Is it, how do we do this better? Because it happens. Pancakes need to happen, Dave, but how do we do them better?
Here's the cheat code for how to make pancakes. Okay. Almond flour is expensive. It easily oxidizes. It's full of phytic acid, oxalic acid, lectins, and tannins, which we haven't talked about that much. I'm not saying it's bad for you. I'm just saying if you're going to eat lots of it every time you have pancakes, a lot, you're going to pay for it later. So you could throw a little bit in there if you want to. But if you use coconut flour, that's really useful. You can use sweet white rice flour, which does have small amounts of phytic acid in it. But because we got rid of the brown part where most of the toxins are, it works. And if you soak it overnight, it works even better. So suddenly, if you have white rice flour, you can have coconut flour, you can have green banana flour, and you can even have cassava flour. And you can have tapioca flour, depending on how many carbohydrates you want to have. These are relatively low toxin sources of good flours that you can use for baking. And if you add some collagen protein, I mean, you make a good collagen protein instead of eggs. If you're sensitive to eggs are great for you if you tolerate eggs and you can afford them. I don't know if you've covered the fact that hundreds of eggplants have been lit on fire over the last year in the US. Like, someone is burning our egg manufacturing facility on purpose. And there's all sorts of theories as to who and why. I don't know what that is. All I know is eggs are getting expensive because our production capacity is getting intentionally destroyed by someone or something. So if you use collagen, though, and you're egg free, you can do that. You need a protein to bind it. You can also use grass-fed yogurt, ideally sheep's yogurt, if you want to be healthier, as a protein to bind it. You mix that up with the flour and some water and some baking powder, and magically you have amazing pancakes. And any of those flours will work. I make pancakes for my kids all the time when they're here, and it works just fine. You don't have to use almond flour. It's really expensive.
Can we link to a Dave Asprey pancake recipe in the show notes, please?
I'll have to write one up, but I could do that. You want me to measure? I don't measure anything. I'm a chef. I wrote a cookbook. Like, I just put all the stuff in a bowl and it works every time. All right, I'll measure it out for you.
Please do. So you mentioned grass-fed yogurt. Where are you these days on, is 100% grass-fed yogurt the way to go, or do you opt for the A2, or it doesn't matter? This is another hot topic, lots of opinions.
I mean, I will say go to daveasprey.com/roadmap and you'll find the Bulletproof Diet Roadmap. My take on dairy hasn't changed because we have no new science. This is going back 14 years. I've been saying the same thing in the same order. The milk that's most compatible with humans, aside from human milk, is camel milk, which you can't get. So don't worry about that one. The next best milk is grass-fed sheep milk, and sheep's yogurt. Most people tolerate that, even if you can't touch cow milk. After that, you get into goat milk and goat yogurt, which is all right. After that, you get into, for cow's milk, raw A2 is the way to go if you can get it. If you can't get that, you get A2 milk, which means grass-fed milk only. After that, you get into the industrial A1 milk, which I don't think you should eat, even if it's made into yogurt. But if you're on a budget and you're not sensitive to that type of milk protein, which many people are, it's sensitive in ways you don't even know. It creates autoimmunity. It creates brain fog the next day. It creates profound cravings. It creates gastric distress. But you may just, because you always get it in something, you just may not even know. So the worst milk you can have is industrial, homogenized, pasteurized, and then further cooked A1 milk. And the best you can get realistically is sheep milk. And you can test yourself. Don't do any dairy, even including butter, and then have some raw A2 milk. And if you feel amazing and you don't have massive cravings, you don't have to eat, the whole container of that yogurt made out of that, you probably tolerate it and you can do it. Milk in and of itself is not bad for you if you're not sensitive, but so many of us are sensitive that it's a potential kryptonite food. If you tolerate it, even something like a grass-fed whey protein concentrate is a great source of protein. You just don't want to have 10 tablespoons of it every day because it'll raise your insulin levels too much. So I would say include dairy protein as an affordable dairy protein. Just make it from ethically raised grass-fed cows. And there's plenty of brands that do this now. The old days of corn and soy soaked in glyphosate fed to cows, those days are over. Let's not do that. That's slightly better than eating bugs and definitely better than eating a plant-based diet. No matter how many people tell you it's going to change the carbon on Earth, it will not.
And there are so many options. If you look for a grass-fed yogurt, there are just so many options.
In fact, Jason, when I opened the Upgrade Cafe in Santa Monica, it used to be called the Bulletproof Cafe, about 8 or 9 years ago, there was nowhere to buy grass-fed steak in LA. You couldn't get it. So I opened a place that had grass-fed steak and all foods cooked in saturated fats, grass-fed butter, the highest end ingredients. But it was like fast casual. I wanted to be affordable. And we closed it down right before Christmas in 2022 because at this point, it was one of the early impact sites for grass-fed in restaurants. I can go to more than 100 restaurants and order a grass-fed steak. And it's become a thing that healthy people eat. And I couldn't keep a restaurant open in Santa Monica because it actually is kind of like the set from The Walking Dead. There's just a massive economic problem and a government problem there. So, I was sad to close it down, but I feel like our mission accomplished because getting grass fed as a thing in Whole Foods. That's why Bulletproof grass fed collagen in the very early days, and now there are dozens of companies making quality grass fed collagens, including your grass-fed collagen, because it's so important that the word grass-fed is on there. And the idea is let's plant the seed to create demand for stuff that builds soil and builds healthy animals.
I loved your cafe. No matter where we were in LA, Colleen and I always had to go, and we double park. One of us had to go in. I would always just do the coffee with ghee. Colleen would do the whole Bulletproof coffee itself, but such a great place. You were such a pioneer. And I agree, mission accomplished. And I agree, doing business in the state of California is a headache you probably don't need right now.
Yeah, I still have Upgrade Labs. And in fact, the knowledge for Smarter Not Harder came from Upgrade Labs. We opened that underneath Arnold Schwarzenegger's office right next door to where the restaurant used to be. And that's what taught me all of these things about what people actually want when they say health. What does that even mean? It means one of 5 different things for most people. And then the technology or the techniques to get there quickly are a mystery. So then, I just want to be healthy. I never thought about how to measure it. I mean, you've got your 28 vials of blood. Most of us aren't going to do that. I mean, I do a bunch of blood work too, but the average listener is like, I don't have money or time or understanding. And that's not my thing. Like they're not into it, but they still want to know what's most likely to work for me. And so a lot of thought went into structuring the book. So, what do you care about? Because, for you, it might be, I just want my brain to work so well. Like that's my biggest thing. I just want to be dialed in all the time. Right. Or it could be, I want enough energy to surf for 4 hours a day, whatever you're into. I don't think you're surfing in Florida, but you get the point. So we have to start looking at, what are the goals? And what I did is I kind of created buckets for this and realized if this is your top goal, what are the side benefits that you're getting for that? that might apply to brain function or might apply to stress resilience or cardiovascular or muscle or just energy production and weight loss. So different people like, I want my energy back versus I want to be ripped. Totally different goals, different pathways, and a different set of knowledge and technologies, all of which work like 3 to 5 times better than what you probably do.
This is a great segue to fitness because I think in terms of diet and nutrition, they're not time sucks. We're just making probably poor decisions. But with fitness, there are a lot of time sucks, and there we have an efficiency problem. And the biggest knock on health and wellness is I don't have the time or I don't have the resources financially. And with food, I think we have come. Looks, eggs are a lot more. Things are more expensive, but we've come a long way. You can. Most people can find a way to do it. We still access is a big problem. We got to stop subsidizing corn and soy. That's a whole other discussion to make things even more affordable. But with regards to fitness, we see it all the time. There are people who are exercising a lot and not getting results. And then there are people who start to exercise and say, I don't have the time. Life happens, kids happen, and so forth. So what are the biggest time sucks with exercise that we're just wasting our time with and we're just not getting results?
When I went into the neuroscience of all this for Smarter, Not Harder, it became abundantly clear that one of the ways our body saves energy is by making cognitive shortcuts. When you have a ton of time and a ton of energy, you can sort of ponder on something and really think about it from all the angles. But most of the time, that takes too much work and too much time. So invisibly to you, what in the book I call your meat operating system, it takes intellectual shortcuts. And one of the easiest and biggest ones that affects us in health and wellness, it's a really common one. If something is bad, less of it is what you should do. And that doesn't make any sense because cortisol, the hormone, too much cortisol is bad, but no cortisol will kill you. Like it turns out there's an optimal amount. There's a correct amount where you perform best and feel best. But we don't think like that. We just think it's bad, don't do it. And then on the flip side, we think if something is good, more is better. So if more is better, just do it. And okay, well, water, you drink enough water, you can die from depleting minerals in your body. And people do this in marathons every single year as hyponatremia. You got overhydrated without electrolytes and you died from water, not to mention drowning. So water isn't good or bad. Cortisol isn't good or bad. And exercise isn't good or bad. But what we typically think is the more exercise I do, the better. And that the more I struggle, the better it is. But I introduce a new concept in Smarter, Not Harder, and it's called slope of the curve biology. And it's kind of maybe not the sexiest name I could have come up with. I was going to call it the spike, but that just seemed, I don't know, too aggro for me. So what this means is that instead of the amount of work you do, it's the rate that you turn on the work, and very importantly, the rate that you turn off the work. That's what drives your body to change. So what I did when I went to the gym for 702 hours over that 18 months that I'm not going to get back is I said, well, I'm just going to grind myself down every time. 45 minutes of weights, 45 minutes of cardio. Cardio, of course, it's at 15-degree incline. Of course, I'm wearing a backpack with some weights in it, and I'm just going to push because pushing equals success. That's not how it works. What the body does when you do that is it creates a stress response. If you want adaptation quickly, what you do is you find a way to fully load the body in the quickest possible amount of time, so that you turn the signal on all the way up, almost to the point where you can't handle it, where you would reach what's called disequilibrium, where you dysregulate your system. And what we normally do is we do that. So I started with a sprint, I warmed up a little bit, then I sprinted. And then after the sprint, I went down to 70% and I just grind it out until I'm just exhausted. That actually doesn't send the right signal to the body. What I'm telling my body to do in all of these different things, whether it's even meditation, is how do I get there as fast as possible? And then how do I return back to baseline as fast as possible? And when you do that, the body says, oh, I got a signal where I thought I was going to die. But instead of then being stressed for a while afterwards, as you were grinding it out, I was able to return to baseline really quickly. Therefore, I wasn't really about to die. So I can move up my set point for disequilibrium. In other words, you become more resilient. And because you quickly return to a calm state, now you have extra energy biologically to put into improving your system. But if instead you send the signal, I'm just going to pound you, grind it out, suffer, sweat, the person wearing spandex in the front of your spin class yelling at you, yeah, you might get endorphins when you're done, but you do not get rapid adaptation. One of the technologies of dozens that are in the book that I talk about is called REHIT, which is reduced exertion high intensity training. And this is something we do at Upgrade Labs. And by the way, Own and Upgrade Labs is where you can open a franchise in your town. We're opening more than a dozen of them across the US right now from entrepreneurs who I'm partnering with. ownandupgradelabs.com.
Before we move on to the answering the where you're going, any for South Florida?
I'm talking to a couple of people who are interested, but I haven't signed a deal yet in South Florida. So it's available. And this is going to be a big national thing. We've got just in many states now, we've either got deals signed or people signing deals. And it's literally a chance to have a biohacking facility that works so much better than going to the gym, where you also can improve your brain with neurofeedback, and you can fix muscles and cardio and stress management and energy production, all those things. It's not like the gym, but you can also go to the gym if you want to. I'm not going to make your tricep bulge like Michelle Obama or somebody, but I will get you the big muscles you need in your body to stay young, and I'll do it in 5 minutes instead of in 5 hours. So there's that.
So
So
sorry, you were explaining REHIT.
this is one of the technologies I teach about in Smarter Not Harder in the book, explaining all the science. And this is something where in 2 university studies out of the University of Colorado, they show that, get this, 5 minutes of exercise 3 times a week. And of that 5 minutes, only 20 seconds is hard. The rest of it is actually barely moving. If you do that, you will improve your cardiovascular capacity by 12% in 6 weeks. So you're talking 15 minutes a week for 6 weeks. You get a 12% improvement in VO2 max, which is the gold standard for this. By the way, a 12% improvement in VO2 max is associated with 2 years of longer life. So this is a big change. Now, compare that to what most of us think is necessary, which is, well, if I just go to spin class 5 days a week for 45 minutes, I know I'm going to get in shape. Well, 45 minutes of spin class 5 days a week gives you a 2% improvement. You got 6 times more results by doing 3 5-minute workouts. And so doing more of it doesn't improve the results. If I do 3 10-minute workouts, it actually works worse, not better.
So for someone who does not like spinning or running at all, I am very attracted to this idea. What does this look like? Can you give us an example? Is this a sprint? Is it, for someone who tracks, I'm wearing my Whoop, someone who tracks heart rate, what should we look for? How can we do this?
What you do, and the way to get those kind of results is the AI driven system that's pushing you at Upgrade Labs. So you might not get identical 12% results, but you'll get better than you'd think. A lot of people have heard of high intensity interval training. This is not that. So with high intensity interval training, we typically run 3 or 5 intervals, and you run for 30 seconds to a minute as fast as you can. Then you walk for a minute, calm down, then you do it again. That's better than just going for a long jog on almost all measures. But what this does is it says you walk for 2 minutes so slowly you're bored. Like as calm as you can make yourself, like a walking meditation, like duh, 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 like people think I'm stupid in the park, like I must be high. That kind of level. Okay. And then immediately for 10 seconds, you run as if your life depends on it. And maybe you want to do a few more seconds because running isn't as good as using an AI driven bike. But when you run, you're sprinting like you're going to die. It has to be a tiger chasing you. Your stress response needs to go all the way up. You need to be sprinting to the extent of what you can do. And then what I would have you do is lay down on your back in the park after that. And on the AI bike, you return to moving really slowly. And you lay down on your back and you deep breathe and you meditate. You return as fast as you can to calm. And then you get up and you walk really slowly for another minute or 2. And then you do it one more time and then you're done.
Wow, that's it.
And that works better because what you're doing is telling the body, you better be ready to run away from a tiger, but you got away, but it might happen again. And after you got away, you had plenty of resources to improve your capacity. But if instead your body thinks, look, there's a tiger chasing me because I did the sprint and then I just kept running some more, it's like, clearly you didn't get away from the tiger. So any of that energy that could have gone into repairing and upgrading goes into survival, which is a different system in the body. So what we're doing In each of the hacks in Smarter Not Harder is we're sending a signal into what I call the meat operating system to tell it to do what we want. And this idea of a meat operating system is really interesting, and it's fundamental to understanding how we are in the world. And this idea comes out of my 40 years of Zen company, which does a high-end executive brain upgrade in Seattle. And what we do for that is we measure how big of a lag there is between when, say, you hear a sound like that. You and I both heard it right away. Like maybe there's a lag time of sound, getting transmitted to you, but it's very, very, very small. Well, it turns out that's not how your brain works at all. Your brain, depending on your age and how fast your brain is, it's about a third of a second after a sound happens is when your brain gets the first electrical wiggle that you're processing a sound. So there's a third of a second lag time. And if you're 18 years old or you have an upgraded hacked system like mine, you're going to have a quarter second instead of a third of a second delay. So young people have faster sensing of reality. And as you age, you get slower and slower at picking up reality unless you're remarkably healthy or well-trained. So what the heck? Who's in charge between when that sound happens and when your brain gets it? Because it's not you. It's an automatic system in your body. As a matter of fact, it filtered the sound and then handed the sound off to your brain. And it's filtering all sorts of things and responding automatically. And what's really scary about this, Jason, is it's invisible. I don't sense that there's a third of a second or a quarter of a second lag time in everything around me. It feels like it happens right away. That is a lie that my operating system is telling me because I'm sitting in here writing in this body, but the body's doing stuff that's invisible to me. And so that's a proof of it. But we also have other things, like most of us don't know how to control our heart rate consciously or how to change our skin temperature consciously. Those are things you can learn with biofeedback and neurofeedback. And I certainly know that you can teach your brain to move blood to the front of your brain. It's a conscious act you can do with a certain kind of feedback that looks at blood density in the front of your brain. But that's invisible. It's always invisible unless you make it visible. And if I'm not paying attention to it, it just works. So all of this stuff, what's going on in here that we don't know about? How is the body doing that? Well, that's your operating system. And it has its own goals. And biggest goal is don't get eaten by a tiger. And it sets you up for that. And it decides, should I be stressed? Should I put on muscle? Should I make sex hormones? Should I make inflammation? Should I make electricity? And it's doing this on a second by second basis. And it's doing that in response to your environment. So a lot of the biohacks in Smarter Not Harder, they're teaching you how to get a signal into your body so it'll do what you want, even if you don't have direct control over it.
So to close the loop on that routine where you're sprinting like your life dependent on it for 10 seconds and then relaxing, is that a 1 day a week? Is that a multiple day a week?
The studies showed doing it. This is with an AI-backed bicycle system, the one we're using at Upgrade Labs. They showed 5 minutes 3 times a week was optimal.
Okay. And so if we're doing that to optimize our cardiovascular fitness and ultimately increasing our VO2 max, which you shared is there's a correlation there with longevity. And I think that's becoming more top of mind for people, although it's difficult to measure. You can do that at Upgrade Labs, I'm assuming, measure your VO2 max.
We don't do direct measures of VO2 max because it's actually really uncomfortable. Most people don't want to do it. You have to put a mask on and get on a bike and ride at full power for a while. And what VO2 max measures is how good of a job does your body do at using oxygen? Like how efficient is it? And so you ever see those, kind of aggressive looking things of people wearing a mask with tubes coming off of it on an exercise bike? That's VO2 max. Only pro athletes really, really want to do that.
Got it.
I did, by the way, I did have it in Beverly Hills for a little while, but the number of people who wanted to come in and do that was not that high.
I think the tide may be turning on that, but we'll move on. So if that's cardiovascular fitness, how do you think about resistance training?
Well, resistance training, it's a similar thing. If you have an artificial intelligence driven system that changes the algorithm getting in, and this is a different chapter of Smarter Not Harder, I go through in each of the chapters, here's a principle that you probably didn't know. And here's the stuff you can do at home with what you have. Here's a low cost thing you might want to get. And here's the crazy billionaire way of doing it. Ideally, that's what you're probably going to find at Upgrade Labs. So you don't have to go buy all the, $50,000 gear or whatever it is to cause it to happen. But the principle for this is that when you're lifting weights, your body is lazy. And that's good. It's so you don't starve to death. So your body will always take the path of using the least amount of energy to get something done. And that's why you see bodybuilders constantly and athletes constantly talking about your form is wrong. Do it in the harder way, because that's going to cause more adaptation, because you're actually making the body do what it doesn't naturally want to do. Well, one of the things, even if your form is perfect, that's holding your body back is that your body's deathly afraid of gravity. And you say, what do you mean afraid of gravity? It's always there. Yeah, it's always there. And that's why if you pick up some kind of a dumbbell-like thing, like I have this mug thing here. So I pick this thing up and you say, well, I'm holding it. But what your body senses that when I wobble it a little bit like this, that wobble means it weighs more. Just like if you throw something up in the air and you catch it, when it lands, it weighs a lot more. And it weighs a lot more at a predictable rate from physics. It's called 9.8 meters per second squared, if you remember that from like ninth grade physics. So that means when you pick up a 45-pound plate to put it on a bar, it actually weighed more than 45 pounds during any time it was moving. And this is why we will sometimes throw a bar up, because it's less work to kind of accelerate it so the body gets a break because you threw it, but then you have to catch it and it's more work. That's poor form. But your body's afraid that gravity might make it heavier than it is, so it holds back your ability to engage your muscle because it knows you might need more because of gravity. So there are several different systems that work to use something besides gravity to push on your muscles. And the cheapest and simplest one is resistance bands. And you see things like TRX and a bunch of other systems. They work the way they work because they're taking gravity out of the equation, instead using a different equation, the stretchiness of the band. And I talk about even ways to use gravity differently in the book. But the system we're using at Upgrade Labs uses a computer controlling what's basically a winch, so that it moves at a predictable rate and the body senses there's no gravity. So I'm pushing full strength. When I first started experimenting with this stuff about 9 years ago, I did a 1,600-pound belt squat. Now, that would destroy your legs and your back if you were doing that in gravity, because 1,600 pounds, you wobble a millimeter, it's going to weigh whatever, twice as much as it would be, and it would crush you. So I could do this because I wasn't actually working against gravity. I put out 1,600 foot-pounds of force. It destroyed the expensive, I was wearing Oakley combat boots, and it destroyed them. Like it flattened them out like a car had parked on them, right? But I was able to engage my glutes and my quads in a way that I could never do if I had weight on a bar, because my body would have been holding back. I didn't have to hold back. So all of a sudden, like, oh, we can build muscle 3 to 5 times faster when we don't use gravity. So what are the ways you could take gravity out of your weight lifting so that you can do resistance training and get a stronger skeleton and stronger muscles in a lot less time? And what that workout looks like is about 5 minutes. You might sweat a little bit on that one, because when you push at full power like that, it's nuts. A friend of mine, Mark Bell, one of the top 5 power lifters in the world, came up to be on my show years ago. And I had one of the first machines that we have at Upgrade Labs at my home, at my test lab. And this guy's like, he could bench press 5 of me, I'm sure. You know, Mark's a powerful guy and a really nice guy. And he gets on the machine where the computer's going to win, right? And he's pushing, on this bench press thing. And after, 2 reps, like, what did you do to me? You can't make Mark sore. Like, what are you talking about? But it was one of those things where, wow, it's a different experience. It's just getting a different signal into your meat operating system. And this one is that you can push harder than you think, and you need to be able to push harder than you think. But since you don't have to worry about gravity, it was safe enough to do that. And I talk about other technologies like even electrical stimulation, resistance bands, and ways of moving even with weights that are different. The reality is that all resistance and muscle building training up until the last few years has been pick up rocks. And the big innovation was we concentrated the rocks into iron to make it harder. And otherwise, that's it. And, push-ups, I guess that counts too. You pick up yourself or pick up a rock. We can do better with tech. And the reason I think this matters enough to write Smarter Not Harder and to spend a couple thousand hours writing is that if you didn't go to the gym because you didn't get very good results from lifting weights, or because you kept getting injured, or because you just didn't have time, well, if you could do this once a week, maybe twice a week, and it took 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and you actually walked around with the muscles you wanted, maybe you would do that. In fact, I think you would.
It's so interesting. Anecdotally, I was let's pick up the rocks guy. I used free weights forever. And most recently, in the last month, I joined a gym here in Miami and started working with a personal trainer. And I said, look, my goals are, longevity, I'm 48, take it easy on the joints, got lots of issues. I want to gain some muscle mass, because I started to notice like, hey, I'm kind of losing muscle
It was all
mass.
the nut butter.
Exactly. It was all the nut butter. Let's focus on this. And it's been a month, amazing results where I gained almost 5 pounds of skeletal muscle mass in a month. And I'm 48. So it's like, no, it gets more difficult. And I've just been so amazed in that we're doing a lot of resistant bands with so little weight. And I walk out of there feeling like I got the most incredible workout. And I look at the weight and the resistant band compared to what I was doing previously. Wow.
There you go. You're a living example, and you have a good trainer. And a lot of trainers have figured out that resistance bands get a signal into muscle better than lifting free weights. And if you love kettlebells, you love free weights, there are things that you can do with those that train systems, and there's cross movements. I'm not saying you have to throw those out. I'm just saying that they're less efficient. And for most people listening, unless you're into lifting and going to the gym and you just love it and there's a community, and that's great. Like I encourage that. But if you're someone who's like, this is drudgery, I really want to go spend time with my kids, I just have to make it to the gym, I only have 20 minutes, do the stuff that gives you the biggest muscles the fastest and do it on the largest muscle groups. If you get your chest, your lats, your quads, and your glutes, you're going to have enough muscle mass to have a functioning metabolism and a bigger brain and to not have diabetes. And you can do that in vanishingly small amounts of time. And after that, you can have someone who exercises, all three different parts of the shoulder, and you get your triceps, and there's that like outer butt muscle from like all of that is good. But I think most people who are time limited because of family, because of career, just maybe because they wanted to go meditate more, you need the basics, and you can get the basics in almost no time. And from there, you can go up and you can choose to allocate the time you saved, allocate it towards neurofeedback and train your brain, or allocate it towards learning how to manage stress better, or allocate it towards community service or your schooling or reading a good book, whatever makes you happy.
Well said. So, of all the great tips, tricks, hacks in the book, is there one that stood out to you personally that really had an impact on your health and well-being?
Yeah, it's the second to last chapter in the book, the one on spiritual hacks. And this is a touchy subject because a lot of people have things that we've learned, and this is the right way to go about your spirituality. And I think all ways of approaching meditation and spirituality are important. But the idea is that you can get into these advanced spiritual states by sitting in a cave for 10 years and eating gruel every day, and you're living an ascetic life. And in fact, in Buddhism, they call it the fast path. You go all in all the time. But today, there are faster paths where you can reach those states in far less time. And I know this because I've had 1,500 people come through a high-end neuroscience program where we use computers to show them the state of the guy who's been in the cave for decades. So, that's what it feels like. That's the on switch for that. So the fastest and most important thing for that side of things is something I call the reset mode. And I teach it fully in the book. And it's at the core of 40 Years of Zen. And what it's about is something called forgiveness. And forgiveness, when you do it right neurologically, it's a way to turn off all of the useless notifications in your brain. And if you wanted a hack that made everything in life easier, this is what's made me able to do multiple New York Times bestsellers and 300 million downloads and $100 million company and a bunch of other companies. And I could talk all this stuff about myself or whatever, but I've been more successful than average. And I've been less stressed than average, even though I've been through some really heavy stuff over the last 5 years. I'm still here. I'm still present. I'm actually happy. I like my life. I like myself. And it's because when we get stressed, your meat operating system will throw up all these notifications. They come up as anxiety. They come up as stress. They come up as negative self-talk. They come up as worry. They come up as procrastination. And it's like if you had your phone and your phone's here and you're just constantly, every system that wants to alert you is alerting you all the time. You actually can't use the phone. Well, your brain is like that phone when you've been programmed by your environment to be stressed all the time. Forgiveness and the reset mode that's in the last chapter of Smarter, Not Harder, it's about learning how to go in and edit your operating system notification settings. So something that would have triggered you no longer triggers you. And it's a process that involves first finding the first time you felt a certain way, the first time you were triggered in that way that you can remember, and then figuring out something good that happened from the experience. And this is really challenging for people. That's why I like to do it with neurofeedback. But like, what do you mean something good? A car hit me. Nothing good came out of that. Well, the reality is something good that came out of it is no one died. Or something else good is you got a new car, even if you got injured, right? So you just have to find the tiniest bit of good, because gratitude is the spark that can light forgiveness. But if you don't have the spark of gratitude, you actually can't do forgiveness. And forgiveness isn't telling someone you forgive them. It isn't saying that what they did was okay. It's just you turning off a notification so that you don't close down every time you re-experience something that would trigger you. And so this is a way to be untriggered. And I teach people that. And if you don't get any kind of tech, you don't do anything else, and you're going to meditate for an hour, you can meditate on visualizing global peace. Great. Thank you for doing that. You also could spend that hour going through and turning off the things that trigger you. And it's just a higher value for your time.
Feels like something everyone needs in a world that is highly polarized, and people seem to be triggered by lots of things these days.
I was at a Joe Dispenza meditation recently. He's a friend who's been on my show a few times. And someone behind me in line to get in. This is to get into a 7-day meditation retreat, right? It's like, well, that triggers me. And I don't know why it popped into my head, but I turned around. I said, oh, what's in your gun? And she goes, what? And I go, well, if you're getting triggered, you must have a gun and it must be loaded with something. What is it? And she just looked at me and she goes, I'm going to have to go meditate on that. So I don't know, but whatever's in your gun, if someone can trigger you, you've got forgiveness to do.
On that note, how do you personally deal if you are a trigger for so many people in our space, those specifically who are, I would say, lean vegan or are vegan or plant-based?
I was a vegan. These are my brothers and sisters. I don't know how they could be triggered unless something they're doing isn't working that makes them triggerable. Maybe it's their diet. What do you think? Sorry, that's just my 7th grade sense of humor.
And I think about this one a lot recently, in that I think about politics and the world we live in extremes, and there's tribalism. And I think about diet in our world. And I think that, within our world, that you've got, people who lean towards paleo, carnivore, bulletproof, if you will. And then you've got hardcore plant-based, and there's so many similarities. In some ways, you're so close together in terms of philosophy. I think philosophy, there's a lot there. There's a lot of overlap, but we just can't we can't all get along, can we?
No, but it's the same in other politics. If you look at the extreme left and the extreme right, man, they sure sound a lot alike. It's the extremism. And that's why I wrote the first big diet book that I wrote, the Bulletproof Diet, because I had tried being a vegan and a raw vegan, and I'd tried full on hardcore keto, and both of them worked for a short period of time, but neither of them is sustainable or healthy. So I'm like, guys, we can cycle in and out of ketosis. We can choose the right plants. We can choose the right fats. So I'm not going to say all fat is good and all carbs are bad. I'm also not going to say all plants are good, because I lived both of those extremes and both of them trashed me. So it was like, how do we cycle in and out of this? How do we stay curious and stay in the middle and do what works for us now? And it's not an orthorexic approach. It's knowing what foods harm you, even if they're okay for the guy next to you, because we're not all the same.
Agreed. And I think you mentioned a word which I think is very important, and many of us forget, is stay curious. And I feel like in our world, we go to our tribal corners and we have our point of view, and in some ways, people lose their curiosity. Maybe what this guy over here is saying, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe I should take a look. Maybe that challenges my point of view. Maybe I disagree, and that's okay. Not a bad person, but I disagree.
There's a reason that we aren't curious. And it's funny that it ties back into the other big thing in Smarter, Not Harder. And I call it the laziness principle. And it's that when our systems evolved over time, one of the things that we worry about the most is running out of food, which is the same as running out of energy. So your meat operating system is evolved to look at the couch and say, if I lay on the couch, I use less energy. That's a good thing because there might not be enough food later. So why would I spend any more energy now than I need to? So we're actually motivated to be lazy. So we develop a bunch of shame and, oh, I must be a bad person because I'm lazy. No, laziness actually drove everything you love in your life. Every innovation of humanity came from someone saying, I don't want to do that anymore. Let me invent something better. All right. So laziness is why we are a dominant species, because we didn't want to do the work. And that's okay. So you have willpower, but you can use laziness, assuming it's built into your system. You're not going to get rid of it. You can't get rid of your meat. Like you if you leave your body, you won't be lazy, but then you won't have a body. So there's that problem. So how do we take advantage of laziness? Well, let's look what marketing companies do. You ever had Colleen come home in a pair of really expensive shoes or a handbag, but it was on sale? It's like I saved $300 on these shoes. Has that ever happened?
We're not a big shoe family here. We're more sneakers, but it's a great
Okay,
example.
sneakers,
We'll go with
handbags,
it.
whatever it is, but everyone knows something like that, and we've all done it ourselves. The reality is, you might have spent $300, but you're so excited that you saved $200, you focus on the $200 savings, and that's all you tell yourself. Did you choose to do that? No, your operating system chose to do that because it's lazy. It values savings a lot more than doing work. So when I go to Upgrade Labs or when I do any of the hacks in Smarter Not Harder, the way I motivate myself is not, I'm going to do 5 minutes of something relatively hard. I say, I'm going to save 40 minutes of sucking and sweating with someone yelling at me in spandex. Yes, I saved 40 minutes of garbage time. That motivates the heck out of me. But doing 5 minutes of relatively unpleasant stuff doesn't motivate me very much. So I motivate myself with savings, the same way that companies motivate you with coupons, because the $5 off coupon feels a lot bigger than it really is because we're so motivated to save. So I just motivate myself on time savings. And that makes you happier, and it makes you far less likely to procrastinate and not do one of the upgrades in the book.
So, what do you think we're going to be talking about a year from now?
I don't think we'll have to be talking a year from now because ChatGPT will talk for us. It's going to be so lazy. I can't wait. No, I'm kidding. What we're going to be talking about is more of the AI data that's coming out of Upgrade Labs and lots of research labs as well. Because what we're doing in that business is when you come in the door, we measure you electrically to see how your cells are performing, to see is your fat inside your liver, is around your organs, is one arm more inflamed than the other. And I can see all that with just electricity. It takes 1 or 2 minutes, and I'm gathering the data. And then I'm watching what every member does when they do each of the different hacks that are in the system. And I'm recommending which ones they do at what order to get the right result for them. But then when we measure how they changed, I'm getting more knowledge each time. So what this is doing is creating a data set to know what are the fastest paths for someone who looks like this biologically and wants to go there. How can I save 3 minutes? How can I save 2 minutes? And we're about to use AI to unlock a huge amount of knowledge around what our meat operating system is actually doing and how to trick it into doing what we want. And that's the core definition of biohacking that I wrote 12 years ago. It's the art and science of changing the environment around you and inside of you so you have full control of your own biology. What's coming up next is, how do we get full control in almost no time and effort? So I look the way I want, I feel the way I want, I have the health the way I want, and then I'm free. And that makes me dangerous. That's why it's called danger coffee. Like, who knows what I might do? I might help the little old lady across the street when she needs it. I might say no to something stupid the next time someone proposes it. Maybe I learn my lesson. Whatever the thing is, I want a world full of people who have all of their energy, because all of my research and all my experience says that when people have their full power, we're actually nice to each other. We're wired to be kind. I want a world full of people who are so dangerous that they can choose to be kind all the time. I don't want a world full of people who are so tired that they're peaceful because they're just too tired to do anything that matters. I don't want that world. There are people trying to make that world happen right now. I won't let them.
Well said, Dave. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.